Good day, everyone. This is Sanxingdui. Today, I'm going to tell you about the story of my bronzes and my Sanxingdui bronzes. I will tell you actually two things today. I'm going to share you the views on all the different views on the origins and significance of Sanxingdui. And secondly, I will tell you how I got my Sanxingdui artifacts and the difficult road I took trying to authenticate them. First of all, where is Sanxingdui? If you look at the map, it's actually very near Chengdu, the city of Chengdu. In fact, it's a 1 hour or 2 hours drive away from Chengdu before you come to this beautiful museum. The story started way back in 1929 when a farmer actually, while digging his land, came across some jade relics. He kept quiet and he slowly tried to sell his jade for money. But people soon found out, and there's one Anglican missionary who was really interested in it. He convinced another Baptist missionary, David Graham, to do something and start excavation. And in 1924, they led a team to excavate the site. But they didn't really find anything, maybe a bit more jade, and that's it. It was only 50 years later, in 1986, when they found two pits. Now, these two pits have been dug up by the inhabitants or residents. They destroyed their own artworks and then filled up these two pits, covered up, and then they all left the place. Now, this is important that the fact that it's unlooted because 99% of Chinese tombs have been looted over the past thousands of years. So when they found these two unlooted tomb pits, it was eye-opening. Now, what they found out was apparently, the inhabitants destroyed, broke up their bronzes, broke up their ivory tars, their shells, put them into pits, and then they left the place for good. Archaeologists have been trying to put all the broken pieces together since 1986. What's unique about Sanxingdui is that they found about 57 bronze masks, which look like alien beings from outer space. But this was the characteristic feature of Sanxingdui, of these bronzes. This is a picture of one of them. Actually, most of the masks there were quite small, about around a foot tall. This is one of mine, slightly less than a foot tall. They also found really big masks. This is a picture of one very big one. Then, I have a few big masks. I'll show you two of them. One's a flat head and one's a round head. I took a picture of them next to a bottle of wine so that you understand how tall it can be. On the right, there's a little 40 cm tall bronze piece from the museum. Another small little one on the right, a man kneeling. It's only about 14 cm. And I have one which is almost 3 feet tall. But of course, for a long time in Sanxingdui Museum was this 2.6-meter tall guy. It is quite amazing when you look at it. And then, of course, there's this 4 meters tall, what they call a bronze tree. This arrow points to a little bird, and the enlargement is on the right-hand side. Now, Sanxingdui is considered one of the greatest archaeological discoveries. Why is that so? Basically, because it actually challenges the single branch history of Chinese civilization. Around COVID time, March 2021, China made a major announcement, apparently where the first original two pits were found in 1986. They found 6 more pits. And these 6 pits were also not looted. These are the blue ones are the original 2 pits, and then 6 more red ones, which they found since 2019. Of course, nowadays, the archaeologists in China are a bit more modern. What they did is on the picture on the left is what they did in 1986. But on the right, the picture, this is what they do now in 2019. They built a big structure over the pit, make sure the temperature is controlled, humidity is controlled, and then they started to slowly excavate them. What did they find? They found more beautiful objects. A bigger mask. The mask on the right had a very interesting headgear. Then on the left is a strange looking animal. On the right is some paw, someone's sedan chair carriers or something like that. All this found around 2019. Now, let's go back to the question. Why is Sanxingdui considered one of the greatest archaeological discoveries? Basically, before Sanxingdui, there's this view that Chinese history has one branch. It all started in the Xia dynasty about 4,000 years ago. And then Shang is considered a civilization because they had writing. Before that, there wasn't any established writing methods, which means to say that the timeline for a long time was like this. The Longshan culture, early Tuo, early Gang, Xia dynasty, then comes to the Shang dynasty. This stretches over 10,000 years. This was the established view. Now, when Sanxingdui was discovered in 86, let's see where they are in the context of the Shang dynasty. Shang dynasty be on the sort of northeast side, okay? And the Sanxingdui was here. Now, when they first found it, they thought that Sanxingdui coexisted with the Shang dynasty. Actually, one common factor was that the bronzes from these two cultures were equally fine. First of all, Shang dynasty bronzes were already considered the finest in Chinese history. So when Sanxingdui bronzes were found, and they were found to be equally sophisticated and fine as the Shang dynasty, initial impression was they were probably same period or coexisted before. Now, what bronzes are actually a measure because it's basically a mark of civilization, a mark of development and all that. And bronzes were highly prized by, even today, Chinese arts. It's not easy to make a bronze. If you want to produce a car, you need a whole supply chain, raw materials, steel plates, tires, rubber, workers, the whole supply chain. If you don't have a supply chain, you can't really assemble and build a car. So it's the same with bronzes in those days. If a society or culture can come out with bronzes, that means they have a complex supply chain, which is very important. Now, bronzes, like I said, are very rare and they're very highly valued because for every one piece of bronze found, you can find maybe 500,000 pieces of porcelain. This bronze vessel is actually a wine vessel. It's about less than 2 feet tall, and it was sold in 2017 for $27 million. I'll show you a close-up of this sheep. Okay, on the left, that's a close-up. It's actually a wine vessel. I have something similar of the same size. Similar but not identical because you look at the one on the left, it's got large horn, which is usually a male sheep. Whereas on the right, which is the one I have, is a very no visible horn. So this is probably the female of the sheep. Today I brought to show you another gong, this is much smaller, about the same size as the previous one I showed you. This is also from the Shang dynasty. This is a wine vessel. Here's another piece which I have. This is also a wine vessel. There's a cover on the top. I put a picture of a water bottle next to it to give you an impression of how big it is. A similar one was offered for auction by Christie's in 2014. It was sold without the cover. The story is this. In 1930s, this piece was taken by the Japanese and it ended up in the Japanese museum for many years. The cover was left behind in China. The Chinese were very excited. For a long time, they wanted to reunite with the cover. And so a Chinese businessman went over to New York Christie's and stopped the auction and bought it over. It was rumored that they paid more than 20 million. Why more than 20 million? Because apparently their first offer was 20 million. but the owner rejected them. So they obviously offered more than 20 million for it. Now, the discovery of Sanxingdui actually suggests that Chinese origins had two parallel branches. Two, not one. Before it was just one, which means to say, now this is the established view, Longshan culture all the way to Xia dynasty, Shang dynasty. But with the Sanxingdui, it shows that they have a parallel road. And because at that time, Sanxingdui and Shang dynasty were supposed to coexist. So what Sanxingdui discovery has done, that it shattered the view that Chinese civilization has only one branch. With Sanxingdui, it's quite definitely there. Chinese civilization has two branches. Although there are two branches, the Chinese government's official view is that both branches are innately Chinese. That means they don't want to embrace the fact that Sanxingdui could be foreign in origin. The question is, why do they want to deny any foreign influence? I'm sure they have their own political reasons for it, but just I give you an example why they are so touchy about there being a foreign influence. In 2016, Geographic made the documentary about the Terracotta Army. In that documentary, they raised the theory that this large-sized terracotta warriors cannot be Chinese in origin. And they came up with the theory that it was Greek influence and maybe Greek craftsmen supervised Chinese craftsmen to produce those large-sized terracotta warriors. This theory was pushed by Professor Lucas Nickel from the University of Vienna. And of course, when he came out with it, people criticized. They say that, oh, he's just biased. He doesn't think that Chinese people are capable of making fine art like this. But then it's also possible that, see, Greek sculptures are fashioned from stone or marble, whereas Chinese terracotta warriors were actually made from assembled pieces of clay. Still, the jury is out. In the documentary, they portrayed Emperor Qin Shi Huang as someone who learned about this Greek influence size and liked it very much. And so he gave the go-ahead for his craftsmen to follow the Greek style. This is not true. No one can ascertain that for sure, but it's just artistic creation on the part of the documentary producers. The worst part is that they got a Chinese scientist to support this theory. Dr. Janice Lee was featured in the program to say that she thinks it's possible. When this documentary was aired, the Chinese were furious. How can he say that our first emperor got ideas from the Greeks? So everybody complained. And so what happens, Dr. Lee came out and said, oh, I was misquoted by the documentary producers. I know this for a fact because a few weeks after this, Dr. Lee was supposed to come to Singapore and two other experts to talk about it in a public lecture, but she didn't turn up. In her place was a Chinese official. And of course, he couldn't answer the questions which everyone in the audience wanted to ask her. But the good thing is that she said she was misquoted and she was forgiven. She still got a job right now in the Terracotta Museum. A lot of people have come out with different theories. I'll go through some of them. Number one, maybe they're connected to the Mayan and Inca cultures. That's because they all share a common latitude and some common agricultural and religious and social development. So that's one idea. The other idea is that maybe the Sanxingdui people came from outer space. Okay, now this was 1986. Actually, at that time, there was already a lot of popular appeal for the fact that aliens from outer space came to Earth. One of the most popular books was by Eric von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods. He's written so many books, and his books basically say that human beings probably learned a lot from aliens from outer space. He passed away last year, but today in YouTube, you can still find people pushing this theory. This guy, Praveen Mohan, oh, he's very good. You should go to YouTube and check his videos. He tries to connect a lot of things in India and Southeast Asia and link them to some aliens from outer space. Quite convincing, some of his videos. Now, has Sanxingdui really, do they have foreign influence? Give example. People say, look at this mask with this protruding eyes. Why are the eyes like that? Okay. Now, they say that maybe for a native in China 3,000 years ago, if you see a fighter pilot with his night vision glasses and you want to depict him, wouldn't you depict him something like this with protruding eyes? So maybe aliens from outer space did come to Earth and help Chinese 3,000 years ago. Example is a doctor will use this special scope to see when they operate. So again, it is technology. And the ancient Sanxingdui people were trying to depict this technology which they saw these aliens bringing to them. The third view is that maybe the ancestors of Sanxingdui came from Sumeria. Sumeria is a very ancient civilization, 5,000 years back, and they are known to be very well versed in astronomy, long before maybe we had modern telescopes. There's one item in a German museum, they call it a Sumerian cylinder seal. And in that seal, this metal, they found a picture of this solar system, and it actually mirrors the solar system almost perfectly, the solar system we have today. So the question is, how could people 5,000 years ago know that there are 9, 10, or 11 planets in our solar system? Now, the initial view that Sanxingdui and Shang dynasty coexisted also got debunked. Why? Because radiocarbon dating of organic materials show that Sanxingdui culture existed long before early Tao and way before Shang. Now, radiocarbon dating, you can test it, how old it is, but from organic material, not from metals, organic materials only. So they found that there means this idea that Shang dynasty and Sanxingdui are coexisted. Not true. Maybe the truth is that Sanxingdui is as old as early Tao culture. Okay, that's what radiocarbon dating says. On top of that, there are clues. Sanxingdui bronzes were actually more sophisticated than early Tao bronzes. I'll give you a few examples. This on the left is a Sanxingdui bronzes, very intricate. If you look closer, it is very intricate compared to an early Tao bronze, which is actually quite plain. Another picture, Sanxingdui bronzes is of a wine vessel, and on the right is an early Tao bronze vessel. Again, very plain and primitive. So the question is, if Sanxingdui culture existed at the same time as the early Tao culture, obviously they didn't learn anything from them. Where did they come from? Where did these people come from? DNA tests were carried out on some of the human remains found in Sanxingdui in 2004. But 15 years later, the authorities told us that those tests were not successful because the conditions of soil touched all the experiments. Because skeptics believe that maybe they found that Sanxingdui had non-Chinese ancestry and they don't want this news to be published around the world. We can understand China is just come out from 100 years of suffering. So they want a unity among themselves. Right? So that's easily understandable. Two scientists have written a book, and if that thesis that actually the copper alloy skills of Sanxingdui probably came from ancient summer 5,000 years ago. So they have their own reasons. So this is ancient Sumeria, Sumer, and this is early Tao. So they are saying that they learned their bronze technique from the ancient Sumerians because their bronze technique lagged ancient Sumer by 1,400 years. So maybe the Sumerians brought advanced bronze making skills to Sanxingdui. Then the question is, how did these ancient Sumerians end up in Sanxingdui so far away? Many years ago, there was this called the steppe route. It is way above the what we know today as the Silk Route. And this is probably where the ancient Sumerians traveled to Mongolia and China. This route here is ideal for travelers because in the winters it's dry and in the summer it's hot. Whereas the Silk Road is basically through the desert. So maybe that's where they took the route in those years. Because all along this route, a culture has been established. They call them the Sima Torpedo culture. This culture is characterized by scattered stone settlements, and they're all nomads. They stay there for a while and then they move on. So maybe it's possible that ancient Sumerians left West Asia, slowly traveled through the steppe route, and slowly end up in Mongolia and China. Because there is some commonality between the steppe route region and Sanxingdui. Altai Mountains is part of the steppe route, and if you go to the Sanxingdui Museum today, you find that the Sanxingdui weapons, spears, are almost identical to Altai Mountain spears. So maybe they copied from each other or they exchange techniques with each other. In between the steppe route and Sanxingdui, there's a famous culture called the Tarim Basin culture. They found out many years ago. And the people there had mixed ancestry, European and Asian. Basically, they look at the mummies there and they found two things. On the one hand, they look Caucasian. On the other hand, they use a lot of wool. Wool is something which maybe in the European part of the world they use, not in the eastern part of this world. A Chinese scientist, Professor Fan Yong, wrote a book whereby he gave a few more reasons why he thinks that Sanxingdui could have Sumerian origins. Number one, he said gold masks are actually alien to Chinese culture. Okay, Sanxingdui had a few gold masks. This is also another gold mask. He said that only in West Asia and Middle East are gold masks used regularly. So Sanxingdui gold mask, it could be, could have Middle Eastern ancestry. Second thing, there's a scepter in the Sanxingdui Museum, gold scepter. Now, Professor Fan Yong said that no, scepters are not common in China, but they're very common in West Asia and Middle Eastern cultures. Again, another reason. Another is the Sanxingdui tree. This is another famous piece, about 4 or 5 meters tall if you go to the museum. And he compared with the Sumerian tree of life. It is quite similar. Were the Sanxingdui people practicing some Sumerian culture, procedures, whatever? About a year ago, I was in Qatar Museum, and they have all this little tree of life displays in a museum. So it seems that this tree of life is quite common in Middle East and West Asia. Again, maybe Professor Fan Yong was correct. He also mentioned that Sanxingdui masks had another non-Chinese feature. They had earrings. Today we'll think of them as gay, but not in those days. And apparently in Chinese historical records in the Han Dynasty, foreigners were depicted as people with earrings. So again, another clue that maybe Sanxingdui people were from the far West Asia. Now, why did Sanxingdui civilization suddenly disappear around 1200 BC? There are many reasons for it. There was a major earthquake around that time. You see, the river that goes through Sanxingdui was diverted and to another quite far away. So in those days, they depend on the river as a source of life. And if the river is gone, your civilization, your culture will self-destruct. Of course, that's one theory. Other people think that maybe internal political conflict led to all these people running away. But if you look at records, Xinjiang is famous for earthquakes. In 2008, there was a major earthquake and almost 90,000 people died. Earthquakes are quite common in the province area. Now, what happens after the earthquake? I think a group must have moved northeast to join the Shang dynasty, and another group moved southwest to form their own settlement. Now, those who went northeast and joined the Shang dynasty probably brought with them all their bronze making skills to the Shang dynasty. Because actually, if you know about Shang bronzes, the early Shang bronzes were actually quite basic, but the later Han bronzes were very sophisticated. Maybe. And the other group that went southwest to Jingsha, which is a city supposed to be outside Chengdu, but now Chengdu has expanded so much that it has enveloped Jingsha. This is where the other Sanxingdui settlement group of people went because their artifacts in Sanxingdui and Jingsha were almost identical. Which means to say, after the earthquake, a group of Sanxingdui people went to join the Shang. Another group went southwest to near Chengdu and started their own settlement. And of course, over the years, they developed into what we call today the Shu Kingdom. The Shu Kingdom was eventually swallowed up by the first emperor around 2,000 years ago. So basically, they got erased from history. Now, the big question, how did the masks that I have ended up in Singapore in the 1950s, long before the Sanxingdui masks were discovered in 1986? For a long time, we were puzzled. Only in 1986 that the world realized that there's such a mask exists in China. We scratched our heads for a long time until 2001. That's when the Jingsha site was discovered. And this site, when they discovered, was totally looted. Like I said, Jingsha culture and Sanxingdui culture are quite many common, they have many common roots. So maybe the mask I have came from the Jingsha site because the Jingsha site was looted. Whereas the 8 pits in Sanxingdui Museum, they were not looted. So probably our bronze heads came from there. Channel News Asia was fascinated by how I ended up with the bronzes. So in 2018, they made a documentary. They spent a lot of money. We went to Britain and then we went to France to ask the experts about the bronzes. Now, in this field, no one is Channel News Asia, neither am I the expert. So actually, Channel News Asia initially wanted to end the documentary on a balanced view. But then along the way, 2 things came up. When they went to China in September of 2018, the Chinese authorities told them, sorry, no antiques were ever sold to foreigners. And secondly, if you are a looter, the penalty is severe. And they didn't bring any bronzes to China, of course. They brought big, high resolution photos. And the Chinese authorities look at it and say, nah, those are fakes. So you can imagine how disappointed we all were. Secondly, I know that every year there's this Bloomberg Forum. In 2018, they decided to shift from Hong Kong to Singapore. And who is the keynote speaker? Wang Qishan, who is the number two man in China. He came on the 5th to 7th of November, and he made a state visit. He made a call on our president, our prime minister. So imagine Channel News Asia was supposed to broadcast that documentary on the 6 months before that. They couldn't change. So actually Channel News Asia wanted to cancel the documentary. But after spending so much time, effort, and resources on it, they decided to go ahead. But they were going to tweak it. Now, altogether, we asked 6 experts in the field. One is Professor John Mixick of NUS. Then one is Lazarus Helston of an auction house in London. And then Andrew Lacey, he's a bronze sculptor. All 3 of them said that there's a high possibility that they look real. Okay, no, they're not fully committed. Then they asked another 3, and they were negative. One is a French dealer. He was very rude to me. Said they're all fakes. He has a hidden agenda. And of course, there's Oliver Bobin in a French lab, and of course, the Chinese officials. So they're all negative. So how did Channel News Asia present the documentary? They put the 3 positive views in front and the 3 negative views behind. As a viewer, most people will come away thinking that maybe they are fake. And that is a general impression. Of course, I was very disappointed. But looking at the big picture, I think the CNA did the right thing. We are talking about the relationship between China and Singapore. This is more important than a few pieces of artwork. But after what happened, continue my quest to find out whether the bronzes are real or fakes. Along the way, when we were in Britain, Channel News Asia team, we actually spoke to 4 Chinese experts in Oxford. Actually, what Channel News Asia wanted to find out from them was, how did my bronzes got out of China? What is the circumstances around it? And of course, all these 4 experts, they couldn't give a clue because they weren't looking at it. They were looking at the bigger history of China and the world. So they were not interested, or they were not into how the bronzes were taken out. So they gave no good clues. Now remember, the Chinese official says that no antiques were ever sold to foreigners, and there's a heavy penalty for looters. I was lucky in my search. I came across this book by a British journalist. It came out in 2008, but I only came across this book in 2020. And this book actually contradicted everything at which the Chinese said. For instance, apparently since 1949, the Chinese government was encouraging citizens to destroy their artworks. They encouraged art collectors to donate their artworks to the state. And these donated artworks were then sold to foreigners for cash. Remember, China was very poor then. They need to raise money. And there was this big fire sale. All the furniture were kept in warehouses. All the paintings were kept in whatever. And so actually a lot of the famous antique dealers in the West got their supply from this great fire sale throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. During the Cultural Revolution, Chinese artworks continued to suffer. The Chinese Revolution was a time when anything capitalist, anything old were forbidden, and they need to be removed. What happened was, this is what Jasper Becker wrote, raid guards went from house to house searching for artworks to destroy. Valuable looking artworks were stored and later sold to foreigners. Remember that Cultural Revolution was a time when old culture, people, landlords, intellectuals were all shamed in public. Some died, but many were shamed. And artworks, if it's from the old days, then it has to be destroyed. So a lot of artworks were destroyed. There were outlets for this great Chinese art sale. If you are old enough or you've been to China in those days, there was this friendship store whereby foreigners could buy all these artworks if you have US dollars. During the 1980s, again, China was very poor, although Deng Xiaoping just opened up the Shenzhen special economic region. They still lack money. And so all the various government departments were selling artworks to foreigners. It was apparently they were selling paintings by weight, and bronzes and all that were also. And when they had not enough artworks, apparently a lot of government departments will organize local teams, local farmers to loot the tombs and to sell the artworks. This great fire sale, according to Jasper Becker, came to an end around the middle or late 1990s. That's when all these warehouses full of artworks were all emptied. But imagine those years when all the artworks were deliberately destroyed, deliberately sold to foreigners. So, when the Chinese said no antiques were ever sold to foreigners, not true, according to Jasper Becker. Penalties for looters. The government also organized teams to excavate antiques from tombs. The other thing was they look at my picture and say, oh, my bronzes are fakes. Fine. When Channel News Asia team was there in September 2018, the scientists then showed them the latest excavation in 2013. Once you dig up something, you need to clean them, file them, categorize them, and it takes about 5 to 10 years before they actually display them to the public. They showed Channel News Asia this beautiful looking bronze piece. It's a food vessel, and they say they have not seen it before, and it's not been exhibited before. So Don Tan, who was there, took a photo of that and sent it to me. I said, wow, beautiful, and didn't think much about it. But the next day, I went to my storeroom, trying to get things cleaned up, and lo and behold, I came across a piece identical, equally big. So within one day, after I was told that there's one unique one in China, I managed to produce one in Singapore. So I must be the best bronze sculptor in Singapore to be able to reproduce it in one day. Maybe mine is also one of the real McCoys. I sent the picture back to Dawn when she was in China, and they were all shocked. When Dawn came back to Singapore, she tried to do a clip to include in the final documentary about how is it I got this when they were told that China just found one and has never been displayed to the world. But although this clip was short, this clip never found its way to the final cut because I can understand why they did it. There's this horse, famous horse, and I have also asked different experts to look at it. Okay, this horse is very famous. It is in Gansu Museum. It is actually a small piece, but what I have is a very big piece. Now, it is so famous that the Chinese Tourism Board use it as their logo. In 2007, I invited this Chinese expert, Du Nai Song, who is the number one bronze expert in China. He works in Beijing Palace Museum. I brought him to Singapore because my feeling is always been, if they are fakes, I'm going to destroy them and close the story. But if they are real, then maybe I'll just keep them and do whatever. He came to Singapore, looked at the bronze horse, and he was stunned. And then he's supposed to help me donate back to Chinese Museum. And of course, he came from the Beijing Palace Museum. But what he told me was quite disappointing. He told me that, Kiwi, your bronzes are safer if you keep them in Singapore. I didn't quite understand what he was trying to say. Perhaps he was trying to say in his diplomatic way that these are all cheap copies. For a long time, I scratched my head. We have become friends and we have been keeping regular contact all these years. I visit him often in Beijing, but 2 years ago he passed away. So he's my only contact to the bronze world in China. But he said the bronzes are safer in Singapore with me. It's only recently I understood what he was saying. Because about 2 years ago, this guy, Wang Yamin, who is the boss of Dunai, he was investigated for severe violations of the party discipline and national laws. The rumor is that he's also in charge of the reproduction department, and he swapped some of the real for reproduction and sold the real pieces to the market, tech market. So he's still being under investigation. Just a few months ago, another scandal erupted in Chinese museum. Actually, I only got to know about it in January, but it was in the rumor mills for the whole of 2025. What happened was that a Chinese family donated 100 over paintings to Nanjing Museum in 1959. And one of the great granddaughters found out in May last year that, one of those pieces, which the Nanjing Museum said were fake, appeared in an auction and listed for $12 million. So she kicked up a big fuss, and now everyone in Nanjing Museum, or almost everyone in Nanjing Museum connected to this, are under investigation. Which means to say, maybe it's not that safe to donate to a Chinese museum. I also pursued this question of authenticity with Andrew Lacey. He's the bronze sculptor whom I met a long time ago. I showed him the bronzer. He said, actually, it's not easy to make bronzes. To make a cup, you have to make the positive and negative clay side. Then you pour in the bronze, molten bronze, and then when the molten bronze is solid, you break the cast, and there you get your bronze piece. It's just like making ang ku kueh. But except that for ang ku kueh, the casts can be used many times. Whereas for bronzes, in those days, you have to make a new mold or cast. And Andrew was telling me that to make such a horse is not easy. Why? Because the horse is being balanced on one leg, which means to say the whole weight of the bronze is on this leg. So whoever casts this must make sure that the leg is very strong and the body is light. Otherwise, it'll break. And that's exactly what happened. In the year 2000, the city of Xi'an made a gift of this flying horse and gave it to Lexington in Kentucky. Year 2000. 7 years later, the leg broke, which means to say the craftsman of Xi'an in year 2000 is not as good as the craftsman of the olden days because their leg broke. I showed Andrew Lacey also this piece. I put a bottle of wine next to it to show you how big it is. And the picture on the right shows you how intricate it is. Andrew said that to create this, to produce this, is very difficult. Because all the holes in that dragon's body, you need to fill in tucks and fillers before you actually pour the molten bronze into it. And if something goes wrong, you have to restart again. So it's extremely difficult. Okay. And he doesn't know of anyone who can do it easily today. This piece is actually a wine vessel, and it's actually was first excavated from a spring and autumn period in 1923. This tomb was one of those rare tombs that was still intact. It is considered a national treasure today. 24 years ago, officers from my old university were in town in Singapore, and they offered to authenticate my bronzes. They got Professor Cooper to head this investigation team to try and authenticate this wine vessel. They took a small part back, a broken part, and got all the hazel department to try to find out how old it is. But the trouble is, even today, there's no accepted test that can determine the age of metals. So in this group sent by Prof. Cooper, you have physicists, a spectrographer, all the whole jing gang trying to authenticate my piece of bronze. Unfortunately, they couldn't come to a good conclusion. They can't tell whether it's 1,000 years old or 1,005 or 1,008 or 2,000 years old using all current scientific methods. But I have one question for them. Since this was dug up in 1923, can you tell me whether this piece of mine was made before or after 1923? Because you see, if it was made after 1923, then yeah, it could be a copy. But it was made before 1923, then no one has seen this piece before. So the fakers couldn't reproduce it. And luckily for me, they said that it's very likely that this piece is more than 100 years old. 1923 is 100 years old. So it means it's a good start for me. It's not conclusive, but it is a good start that this could be the real McCoy. After encountering so many dead ends, what's my next move? Another big break I came across a year ago. I know I've been trying to get the Chinese Museum to accept my donation, but they have always taken the view that everything outside China are fakes. But last year, I finally made contact with someone in Beijing, and he said that they are willing to accept my bronzes as donation. So we are working on a plan to bring back some back to China. So before I end, I'm going to show you some photos of some of my bronzes because you never see them in Singapore. Bull, can you imagine how big it is? Put a bottle of wine there. An ox, how big it is. There's a small one in Xi'an Museum. But then in those days, the emperors had bigger pieces and the princes or the lower ranks will have smaller pieces. And they don't just make one piece, they make a few. Another wine vessel, imagine how big it is and the detail that is involved in making it. Another wine or food vessel, this is, I think they have one or two in China. So I have also one or two in Singapore. Look at the detail. The detail is so intricate. Finally, I got a drum, supposed to be from the Shang Dynasty. And this drum is my last piece, and it is to roll in the new year. So happy Chinese New Year, everyone. Thank you very much for your attention.